Despite the polls consistently showing a tight race between President Biden and convicted felon Donald Trump, MAGA Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon, and a number of hosts at the Fox Propaganda Network are so visibly panicked by the uncertain outcome of the election that they are doing a full court press of conspiracy theories, suggesting that the only way Democrats can win is if they steal the election. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video, and they're all wildly unhinged and disturbing and quite dangerous, even compared to what went on in 2020. I want to start with this one here, this clip between Marjorie Taylor Greene, a sitting Republican congresswoman, and Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's top advisor and potential chief of staff should, God forbid, he win the election. She just bluntly says that the only way for Democrats to win is if they steal the election, and she believes that's precisely what's going to happen.
And I fully believe they're going to steal this election. I think it's going to be stolen in November. No one can back me off of that right now.
That's a bombshell.
In
Georgia?
Nationally.
And you think that
I'm concerned. I'm going to tell you, I'm concerned about Georgia.
Tell me.
Fulton County is a cesspool of corruption.
Fulton County, of course, being the county which includes Atlanta. It's also the site of Fani Willis's lawsuits against Donald Trump, the convicted felon, and Marjorie Taylor Greene's cult leader. So, of course, that's why she thinks it's a cesspool of corruption. How dare you hold our God King accountable for any potential crimes? Law and order, remember, is something that Republicans get to impose on the rest of us, on progressives, on liberals, people in blue cities, blue states, black people, women, minorities, marginalized groups. Right? Again, that's for others. It's for lesser people like us. Whereas they get to do whatever they want with impunity. And if you dare attempt to hold them accountable or investigate or prosecute, well, then you're just weaponizing the justice system, and that's incredibly corrupt. This is the cultish religiosity of MAGA. She offers no evidence for her claims, but then again, she never had any evidence for any of the other claims that she's made with respect to the 2020 election. She just thinks it's impossible. It is impossible for someone perfect like Donald Trump to ever lose or be defeated in any fair way. I also want to include this clip just as a tangent in which she goes off on Republicans a bit. That's always fun. And then we'll get right back into the substance of the video, which is, again, this full court press of conspiracism coming from the right, claiming that Democrats are somehow going to steal the election.
Hang on, it's controlled by Republicans.
Yeah, that's the problem, Steve. I'm sorry. I am very cynical these days on the Republican Party.
As well you should be. The Republican Party, of course, when it comes to governance, is incompetent. It's self-interested. It's an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle and no interest and talent for responsible governance. Right? They purely exist as a vector for Donald Trump's vanity project, his malignant narcissism. We're going to play some other clips, but before we do, I do want to look into this op-ed from, I think it's Matt Gertz who's also part of Media Matters, and we're going to get into that as well. He wrote this really good op-ed for MSNBC. The cycle of lies that drove the January 6th insurrection is again underway. 5 months before the 2024 election, claims that only fraud could explain a future Donald Trump defeat are already commonplace in the right-wing media ecosystem. Fox News stars and Trumpist influencers are priming their audiences to listen if Trump once again claims an election was, quote, rigged against him and to come to his aid. And again, we're going to show examples that he lists here. There's a compilation of clips we're about to play. But Gertz goes into detail here about the extent to which, you would think, as he makes the case here, that Fox, of all places, would be less inclined to do this given the $787 million payout they had to make to Dominion Voting Systems. He actually addresses this. He goes, while the network paid a heavy price for its election denial in 2020, including, again, a nearly $800 million defamation settlement with Dominion Voting Systems, its hosts are under constant pressure from other Trumpist competitors, like OAN and Newsmax, who loudly claim that Democratic election rigging is an indisputable fact. Quote, there are no issues with the 2020 election. They stole it, former Trump advisor and right-wing podcast host Steve Bannon said in March. The only way they defeat Trump is to steal it. The only way they defeat Trump is to steal it. The only way they defeat Trump is they steal it. He is unstoppable. Again, the disturbing religiosity that animates the GOP is something for which we should all have contempt. We should also recognize that it is dangerous, right? We shouldn't pretend that it's impotent. We should recognize it for the threat that it poses and give it the appropriate contempt it deserves, which is all of it. I want to play you some clips of these right-wing media influencers, people in prominent networks suggesting that this is the only way that Trump could lose.
Would expect that he'll get through the debate, but the question is, will he be intelligible the whole time?
Those are winning numbers. Those are numbers that says Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States.
He's on the verge of a 1980 Ronald Reagan blowout of Jimmy Carter. And I don't see practically how the Democrats offset reality.
They're going to game the system or, maybe even cheat.
How are we ever going to accept the results of this election in this kind of landscape?
Let's say by some weird, miraculous chance that we didn't see coming, given that Trump is ahead, has a 66% chance of winning, looks like he's going to get the electoral count, and Joe still wins. Well, then what do you do after you win? How do you convince anyone that's real?
Well, again, it would start by acknowledging that we're not even in July yet. Right now, Donald Trump has certain headwinds in his favor, and there are various analyses and betting markets which say that as of right now, he wins the election. But the election isn't today. It's not tomorrow. It's 4 months away, and there's plenty of time for things to change. So what they're saying is, hey, listen, things are in Trump's favor now, that there's no possible way they could change in 4 months. And if they do change in 4 months, what gives? Well, maybe as more people pay closer attention to the election and certain aspects like economic satisfaction, consumer sentiment, President Biden makes a more compelling and aggressive case. Again, these things can happen. They just completely disclose that. It's just not possible. Things look good for us now, so we have to stop the clock, and we just have to assert and impose today's conditions on an election which will happen in 4 months. Again, this is an insane, incoherent argument to make. They'd have a point if the election was today, but it's not today, so they don't have a point. Again, a couple of other clips I want to play here.
I think the one thing I would just note is that those samples at the intro were not sort of just cherry picked. They are reflective of what is happening on Fox News every single day. Every single primetime host at Fox News has claimed that Democrats are going to cheat in order to steal the election in 2024. It's not just Laura Ingraham. That is reflective of it. In terms of what's missing, I think the two things I would note is that the layering in more broadly in conservative media and Fox as well of religiosity. They really they've introduced a lot more religious language. So they keep referring to Election Day as a blessed event. They keep referring to Trump as somebody who's a vessel of Jesus Christ. So they are adding in a layer of holiness. And that, I think, is to help sort of justify and rationalize any sort of violence or action that individuals have to take if, say, Donald Trump doesn't win the election.
Right, because it's no longer a secular political event. It's an entire religious experience that's being peddled to a cohort of Americans who are the most religious and who are most prone to religiosity in general and religious extremism. Right, it's incredibly dangerous. Again, a former Obama official weighs in on this as well and compares it to previous election cycles and why this one is so radically different, even compared to 2020.
2012 was a harder thing for them to swallow, but still. And then even through 2020, you saw some of this before the election, but nowhere near the scale that we're seeing now. And so the point is, there's been an evolution in the information environment into which it is now completely normal for there to be regular, allegations that the Democrats are going to steal the election. There's a kind of messianic, heir to Trump and his campaign. This is more than zero sum. This is like an existential battle in which there's no result that is legitimate other than Trump winning.
Again, incredibly dangerous. That's Ben Rhodes, by the way, and he's not on Pod Save America. He's Pod Save the World, which is, the more foreign policy aspect of the offshoot of Pod Save America. He's an expert in that field, really good commentary. But again, for the reasons that they describe, this is more dangerous than 2020 because Republicans barely accepted, and I say barely accepted, they really had no choice in the matter for all intents and purposes. And the polling has shown that a majority of Republicans don't believe that President Biden legitimately won the 2020 election. Again, this is something which is unprecedented. We've not seen it on the scale. And more disturbingly, swinging all the way back to Marjorie Taylor Greene, is what elected representatives say. So it's bad enough if members of the media, again, influencers on the Fox Propaganda Network and others, people who have a responsibility to get this right, it's bad enough when they lie to their audiences or they deceive their audiences, right, the way that Fox typically does. It's even worse when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene do it because they are in government. They are wielding greater power than the media as a member of the federal government, as somebody who wields state power on behalf of their constituents. They're entrusted in ways that even members of the media are technically not, because again, people who work at Fox are working for a corporation. They should have some sort of civic obligation to tell the truth, right? And we should probably impose stricter media standards on everybody in the media, and have a greater expectation of them, the way that we did, during the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? The so-called golden age of media, when it wasn't like a for-profit, 24/7 information age, propaganda war, right? But that aside, we should have the highest standards of all for elected representatives and members of government. And electiondeniers.org did a report, election denial in the United States Congress. 19 election deniers hold office in the United States Senate out of 100 members. Okay, 19 of them. 151 election deniers hold office in the U.S. House of Representatives out of 435 members. These are staggering numbers, okay? It's a staggering percentage. 126 sitting members of Congress voted to overturn the 2020 election results. 3 election deniers are on the ballot for the Senate. 3. And 100 election deniers are on the ballot for the House of Representatives. And it goes into more detail. This is a truly disturbing trend. Election denialism was not thwarted or sufficiently repudiated in 2020 and in 2021 and in 2022 and 2023, which is part of the reason why I don't believe, as a cynic, I am not convinced that this election will be the silver stake through the heart of the rampant election denialism, which is metastasized within the Republican Party. I know many more people, many other commentators who are much more politically optimistic than me. They'll say, actually, okay, this is it. This is if we just defeat them again, the Republicans will learn their lesson. I have no reason to believe that. The MAGA cult in many ways seems stronger than ever. Not in all ways, certainly not in all ways, but in some ways, in terms of those who are still there, seem to believe this crazy stuff more fervently than ever before. And the Republican Party, their elected representatives, have not engaged in much by way of introspection, right? They had opportunities to turn away from Donald Trump and election denialism. They chose not to. It's incredibly dangerous. I think that this is going to be a problem that we have to repeatedly confront in election cycle after election cycle after election cycle for the foreseeable future. Donald Trump has changed something fundamentally within the Republican Party, and I'm not convinced that it's possible for them to turn back. I don't believe so. I think that the GOP is going to have to lose every damn election in every jurisdiction that we possibly can. As far as I'm concerned, there's just no room for an elected Republican in government because they're part of a cult. The only ones, in my opinion, that there's room for that I can stomach are those who condemn Donald Trump's election denialism and his fascism. The problem is those people get chased out of Congress. They get chased out of the House. They get chased out of the Senate. They get chased out of numerous elected offices. Basically, if you're an elected Republican, you bent the knee to Donald Trump and you are part of the problem. I think they have to be repudiated again and again and again in sweeping terms at the ballot box. And that's why I believe if you're an eligible voter, November's rapidly approaching, and you should vote blue in November in every damn election. Let me know what you think in the comments.